I didn't realize I was being robbed at first. I just knew something felt off, something small, something easy to ignore, and that's the scariest part. Because most betrayals don't announce themselves. They sneak in quietly, hide inside routine, and make you doubt your own sanity. This is the story of how my neighbor walked into my backyard and stole from me again and again, and how I waited until the perfect moment to make him regret every single step. Asterisk if you've ever felt disrespected, underestimated, or taken advantage of because someone thought you were too polite or too passive to fight back, like this video, subscribe to the channel and stay till the end, because this story isn't just about revenge. It's about patience, power, and the moment a woman decides she's done being treated like an easy target. Asterisk I live alone, and because of that, I've always been careful. Not paranoid, just aware. I notice routines, I notice patterns. When something changes, even slightly, it stands out to me. That's probably why I noticed the gas can before anything else. A red plastic gas can sitting on my back patio, right next to my lawnmower, 5 gallons, nothing fancy. Just something practical I used once a week to mow the lawn and keep my place looking decent. The first time I noticed it was low, I didn't think much of it. I remember lifting it, feeling how light it was, and telling myself I must be misremembering. I'd had a long week. I was tired. It was hot outside. My brain immediately jumped to excuses because that's easier than questioning reality. I poured what little was left into the mower, finished mowing, and moved on with my day. But then it happened again and again. Every single time I went out to mow, the can was almost empty. Not completely drained, just enough gone to make me pause. Just enough to make me tilt it back and forth and listen to the slosh that shouldn't have been that quiet. I started paying closer attention. I knew how much gas I used. My lawnmower's tank was tiny. There was no logical reason for gallons of gas to disappear between mowings. That's when doubt crept in. Not anger, doubt. The kind that messes with your head. The kind that makes you question your memory instead of your environment. I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself it was just gas. I told myself not to turn into that neighbor who assumes the worst. But the pattern didn't stop. And slowly, that doubt turned into suspicion. I began replaying small details in my mind. Moments I had brushed off before, like my neighbor. He lived a couple houses down, middle-aged, loud when he wanted to be noticed, quiet when he didn't. The kind of man who watched more than he spoke. He had a habit of standing in his front yard, pretending to work on something while his eyes drifted around the neighborhood, including toward my place. He owned a lawnmower, he owned a car, and somehow, neither of them ever seemed to run out of fuel. That thought made my stomach tighten. Because if I was right, this wasn't just about missing gas. This meant someone was walking into my backyard, crossing a boundary, invading a space that was supposed to be private. As a woman living alone, that realization hits differently. It's not just anger, it's vulnerability. It's fear mixed with humiliation. Still, I didn't want to accuse anyone without proof. Once you accuse someone, especially a neighbor, there's no undoing it. And back then, security cameras weren't cheap or easy. No doorbell cams, no instant alerts, just an old laptop, a webcam, and some outdated motion detection software I barely trusted. Setting it up felt ridiculous. I kept thinking I was overreacting, that I'd check the footage later and feel embarrassed for ever suspecting anyone. I angled the camera toward the back patio so the gas can was clearly visible, tested it once, and left the house. 5 minutes later, the alert went off. When I watched the footage, my heart dropped straight into my stomach. There he was, my neighbor, walking into my backyard like he belonged there. No hesitation, no nervous glances, no rush. He picked up my gas can, walked out of frame, and then returned it a short while later, placing it back exactly where it had been. I watched that clip more times than I can count. Not because I didn't understand what I was seeing, but because I couldn't believe how comfortable he looked, how practiced, how confident. This wasn't a one-time mistake, this was routine. And the most painful part wasn't the theft. It was the realization that he thought I'd never notice, that he saw me as harmless, as someone he could take from without consequences. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the footage in my mind. His walk, his posture, the way he didn't even try to hide it. I thought about confronting him. I thought about calling the police. I thought about putting up signs or fences or lights. None of it felt right. Because none of it would take back that sense of violation. None of it would teach him what it felt like to be powerless. And deep down, I knew something else too. Men like him don't stop because you ask nicely. They stop when they're forced to face consequences. And that's when something inside me hardened. I stopped thinking like a victim. I stopped thinking like someone who needed permission to protect herself. I started thinking strategically, patiently, because if he was confident enough to steal from me repeatedly, then he was confident enough to fall into a trap, and I decided I wasn't going to stop him. I was going to let him keep stealing. After I saw the footage, I didn't cry. That surprised me. I thought I would. I thought fear would take over, or anger would spill out all at once. Instead, I felt something much quieter and much heavier settle into my chest. A realization. Someone had been entering my space without permission, and they'd been doing it so casually that it meant they never once considered the possibility of consequences. From that moment on, my house didn't feel the same. I locked doors I had never locked before. I double-checked windows I had trusted for years. And every time I stepped onto my back patio, my eyes went straight to the gas can. Like it might move on its own. It wasn't just an object anymore. It was evidence. Proof that I hadn't imagined anything. Proof that my instincts had been right. What haunted me most wasn't the act itself. It was how comfortable he looked doing it. No rush. No hesitation. No fear of being seen. He walked into my backyard like it was an extension of his own property. Like I was irrelevant. Like my presence didn't matter. And as a woman living alone, that realization cuts deeper than people like to admit. During the day, I tried to act normal. I went to work. I ran errands. I smiled at strangers. But underneath all of it, my mind kept replaying that video. His posture, his confidence. The way he placed the gas can back exactly where it had been, as if returning it somehow erased the violation. At night, sleep became difficult. Every sound outside made my heart jump. Every shadow felt heavier than it should have. I told myself I was safe. I told myself this was just theft. But my body didn't believe those lies. My body understood something my logic was still catching up to. This wasn't about gas. This was about boundaries, about entitlement, about a man who believed he could take whatever he wanted from a woman because she lived quietly and didn't make trouble. And that's when something inside me began to change. Fear slowly gave way to anger, not explosive anger, not screaming or shaking anger. This was a cold, controlled kind of rage, the kind that sharpens your thoughts instead of clouding them, the kind that makes you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "How long has he been getting away with this?" I started observing him deliberately after that. Not obsessively at first, just enough to understand his patterns. When he left the house, when he returned, how often his car moved, when his lawnmower ran. I noticed how often he lingered outside when he thought no one was paying attention. How his eyes always drifted toward my place before snapping away. The more I watched, the more I understood him. He wasn't desperate. He wasn't struggling. He wasn't stealing because he had no choice. He was stealing because he could, because it was easier to take from me than to spend his own money, because in his mind, I was an easy target, quiet, alone, unlikely to confront him. That realization was humiliating. I kept asking myself whether I should confront him. I imagined walking up to him, phone in hand, showing him the footage. I imagined the lies he would tell, the fake confusion, the sudden anger, or worse, the fake apology designed to make me feel unreasonable. And every version of that confrontation ended with him walking away believing he'd escape real consequences. And I knew something deep in my gut. If I let him walk away clean, he wouldn't stop. He might pause, he might be more careful. But people like him don't change, they adapt. That's when the moral battle started inside me. There were moments when I felt ridiculous. Moments when I told myself I was overreacting. It's just gas, I'd think, let it go. But every time that thought surfaced, another one crushed it instantly. If it was just gas, then why was he stealing it? Why was he entering my yard? Why was he risking being caught? The answer was uncomfortable but clear. Because he didn't respect me. And respect is the foundation of safety. At some point, my fear turned into something else entirely: control. I stopped feeling like a victim and started feeling like an observer, like someone who had been handed information most people never get. I knew his habit, I knew his routine, and he had no idea I was watching. Asterisk. That imbalance of knowledge was powerful. I decided not to change anything right away. I kept the gas can exactly where it had always been. I kept my routine predictable. I wanted him comfortable. I wanted him to believe nothing had changed, because the moment people sense danger, they become cautious, and I didn't want cautious. I wanted careless. Days passed, then weeks, and he kept coming each time I saw him on the footage. My resolve hardened. He didn't hesitate. He didn't slow down. He didn't even look around anymore. That told me everything. In his mind, he wasn't stealing. He was using a resource he believed he was entitled to. That's when the idea fully formed in my mind. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't emotional. It arrived slowly, almost calmly. Like a conclusion my brain had been working toward without me realizing it. I remember standing on my patio late one evening, staring at that red gas can, and understanding something very important. He trusted his senses more than his judgment. He trusted what things looked like, what they smelled like, and gasoline has a powerful smell, strong enough to hide a lot of things. The realization made my stomach flip, not with excitement, but with certainty. From that point on, everything I did was deliberate. I wasn't improvising. I wasn't acting out of rage. I was planning. And planning gave me peace, because planning meant I wasn't helpless anymore. I also knew timing would matter. Revenge rushed is revenge wasted. I needed him to believe I was unavailable, unaware, gone. So I began laying the groundwork. Small things at first: checking my car fluids where he could see me, carrying bags outside, making phone calls loud enough to be overheard, talking about trips, about being away for a while. I could feel him watching. The shift in his body language was subtle, but it was there. Opportunity does that to people. It relaxes them. It makes them bold, and I could see the moment his confidence tipped into excitement. In his mind, this wasn't theft anymore. This was perfect timing. What he didn't know was that I had already crossed the line mentally. I wasn't deciding anymore. I had decided. That night, I stood alone on my patio longer than usual. The air was quiet. The gas can sat exactly where it always had, innocent and ordinary. I remember thinking how strange it was that something so simple could become the centerpiece of a lesson someone was about to learn. I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready. Because the truth was, I wasn't going to stop him from stealing. I was going to let him take exactly what his entitlement had earned him, and he was going to do it believing he was smarter than me. By the time the night arrived, I felt eerily calm. Not the kind of calm that comes from relief, but the kind that settles in when you've already accepted the outcome. When the arguing voices in your head finally go quiet because the decision has been made, and there's nothing left to debate. I moved through my house that evening with steady hands and a clear mind, aware of every sound, every shadow, every small detail that used to scare me but no longer did. I kept thinking about how strange it was that fear had once ruled my life so completely, and now it was gone, replaced by something colder, something heavier. I wasn't acting out of impulse anymore. I was acting out of certainty. I remember pausing in the hallway and catching my reflection in the mirror. I didn't look angry. I didn't look unhinged. I looked normal. That unsettled me more than anything else, because monsters, we're told, always look like monsters, but real turning points don't announce themselves. They slip in quietly, wearing familiar faces. Outside, the night felt thick and watchful. I left things exactly as they were supposed to be, nothing out of place. Nothing suspicious. The backyard looked ordinary, harmless, almost inviting. I wanted it that way. People who believe they are in control never look for danger. They only look for opportunity, and I knew he would come. I didn't sit glued to the cameras like I had before. I didn't pace. I didn't rehearse scenarios. I poured myself a drink and sat on the couch, listening to the house breathe around me, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a dog, the faint sound of a car passing somewhere far away. All of it felt surreal, like the calm background noise before a storm you know is coming. When the notification finally appeared on my phone, I didn't jump. I picked it up slowly. There he was again. Same walk, same posture, same confidence. He moved through my yard like he owned it, like nothing bad had ever happened to him in his life. Watching him felt different this time, not triggering, not terrifying, almost detached. Like I was watching a stranger make a decision that would alter his life, completely unaware of how close he was to the edge. He didn't hesitate. That part still amazes me. No pause. No glance toward my house. No instinct warning him to stop. He bent down, reached out, and took what he believed was his for the taking. In that moment, it hit me how much trust people place in the world staying predictable. He trusted routine. He trusted his luck. He trusted that the woman next door would remain invisible. I felt a flicker of something then. Not guilt. Not fear. Something closer to sadness. Not for him, but for the version of myself that had once believed being passive would keep me safe. That version of me was gone now, replaced by someone who understood that silence doesn't prevent harm. It invites it. I didn't stop him. That was the hardest part for people to understand later, the ones who only heard fragments of the story. They'd ask why I didn't intervene sooner, why I didn't yell, why I didn't confront him. But stopping him would have been mercy, and mercy, I realized, is wasted on people who mistake kindness for weakness. He left my yard just as confidently as he entered it. I sat there long after the screen went dark, staring at my phone without really seeing it. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. That's when I knew there was no going back. Whatever happened next, I had crossed the line internally. I had allowed something irreversible to move forward. The waiting afterward was worse than the act itself. Minutes stretched, then hours. Every sound outside made my chest tighten just a little, not with panic, but with anticipation. I wasn't hoping for anything specific. I was bracing for consequence. Because deep down, I knew the universe doesn't let moments like this pass quietly. When it finally happened, it wasn't dramatic at first. No explosion. No instant chaos. Just a subtle shift. A noise that didn't belong. Then another. I remember standing up slowly, my body reacting before my thoughts did. I moved toward the window but stopped myself short. I didn't want to see too much. I didn't want the image burned into my memory in a way that would follow me forever. Some things, once witnessed, can't be unwatched. The sound outside grew louder, more frantic. That's when the weight of it all hit me at once. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Finality. I leaned against the wall, my breath shallow, my mind racing through everything that had led to this moment, every ignored instinct, every stolen ounce of comfort, every time I'd told myself to be quiet, to be polite, to avoid conflict. All of it had been building toward this exact point, whether I'd realized it or not. Sirens came later. Much later. By the time they did, the night was already fractured. Neighbors stood outside in clusters, whispering, speculating, pretending not to stare while staring anyway. I stayed inside, lights off, unseen. For once, invisibility felt like armor instead of a curse. As I watched the aftermath unfold from a distance, one thought kept repeating in my head, over and over again. He had made his choice. Not that night. Long before. Every time he crossed the line. Every time he decided I didn't matter. Every time he walked into my space believing nothing bad could ever happen to him. Choices have momentum. And eventually, they reach a point where stopping them is no longer possible. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just stood there, wrapped in the quiet aftermath of a life that would never be the same again. His and mine. Because even when revenge is justified, it leaves a shadow. And I knew, as the sirens faded into the distance, that the hardest part wasn't over yet. It was only beginning. The next morning didn't arrive gently. It crashed into me like a reminder I couldn't ignore. Sunlight crept through the curtains, too bright, too normal, like the world was mocking me for what had unfolded just hours earlier. Everything outside my window looked exactly the same: birds chirping, cars passing, neighbors going about their routines, and yet, nothing inside me felt familiar anymore. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my body stiff, my mind replaying fragments of the night over and over again, not in sharp images but in sensations: the tension in my shoulders, the heaviness in my chest, the strange emptiness where fear used to live. I expected to feel victorious. That's what stories promise, right? The bad guy gets what he deserves, and the victim finally breathes easy. But real life doesn't wrap things up so neatly. Instead, I felt watched by my own thoughts. Every sound outside made me flinch. Every knock I imagined at the door sent a cold ripple through my spine. I hadn't done anything illegal, not really, but justice has a way of making you feel guilty even when you're in the right. Especially when you're a woman who's spent her whole life being told to stay quiet and not make waves. By mid-morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. I could hear voices drifting through open windows, people whispering in clusters, speculating, turning the night into gossip. I stood at my kitchen sink pretending to wash a mug that was already clean, listening carefully without trying to look like I was listening at all. Someone mentioned police questions, someone else mentioned previous complaints. That's when my stomach dropped. I realized this wasn't over, not even close. This wasn't the ending. It was the fallout. When the knock finally came, it was softer than I expected, polite, professional, the kind of knock designed not to alarm, but to assert authority. I took a slow breath before opening the door, reminding myself to stand straight, to keep my voice steady, to look like the harmless neighbor everyone thought I was. Two officers stood there, calm but observant, their eyes scanning without being obvious. I could feel their presence pressing against my skin, like a test I hadn't studied for but somehow needed to pass. They asked routine questions. Did I hear anything unusual? Had I seen him recently? Did I know if he had ongoing issues with anyone in the neighborhood? Each question felt like a small needle, not painful on its own, but cumulatively exhausting. I answered honestly, carefully, never offering more than what was asked. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I didn't let it reach my face. Years of swallowing discomfort had trained me well. This time, that training worked in my favor. After they left, I closed the door and leaned against it, my legs trembling. That was when the emotional crash hit me full force. I slid down to the floor, hugging my knees, not crying, not laughing, just breathing through the weight of it all. This was the price no one talks about, the quiet cost of standing up for yourself. Even when justice is on your side, the aftermath still demands something from you. Days passed, slow and heavy. Every time I stepped into my backyard, I felt a strange mix of relief and unease. The space felt reclaimed, but not untouched, like a battlefield after the fighting stops. I noticed things I hadn't before: how much of my behavior had changed because of him, how many routines I'd adjusted without realizing it, how much space I'd surrendered, piece by piece, just to avoid conflict. That realization made me angry all over again, but this time the anger was cleaner, sharper, directed not outward but inward. I promised myself then that I would never shrink like that again. Word spread quickly about his past, the warrants, other complaints, the things people had whispered about but never acted on. Suddenly, everyone remembered something. Everyone had a story. I listened from a distance, stunned by how collective silence can protect the worst people until it suddenly doesn't. Part of me felt vindicated. Another part felt sick knowing how long he'd gotten away with it simply because no one wanted to be the one to speak up. At night, when the house went quiet, my thoughts got louder. I questioned myself relentlessly. Had I gone too far? Had I become something I didn't recognize? But every time doubt crept in, it collided with memory. The violation, the entitlement, the way he'd walked into my space without permission, again and again. Revenge didn't change who I was. It revealed who I had already been forced to become just to survive. The strangest part was the power shift. For the first time since I'd moved there, I slept without double-checking locks. I walked into my backyard without scanning corners. I breathed freely. That peace wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle, almost fragile. But it was real, and it made me realize something important. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about reclaiming yourself. Still, the weight lingered. Revenge, even when deserved, doesn't evaporate once it's complete. It settles into you, reshaping how you see the world. I became more aware, more cautious, but also more confident. I understood now that being underestimated had once been my greatest vulnerability, and now it was my shield. No one suspected the quiet woman next door. And that knowledge gave me control I'd never had before. As weeks turned into months, the neighborhood returned to its usual rhythm. New routines replaced old ones. His presence faded into absence, but I didn't forget. I carried the lesson with me, etched deep, that sometimes standing up for yourself doesn't look heroic. Sometimes it looks lonely, sometimes it looks scary, and sometimes it changes you forever. I wasn't proud in the way people expect. I wasn't ashamed either. I was resolved, stronger, awake in a way I hadn't been before. And as I stood one evening watching the sun dip below the houses, casting long shadows across my yard, I realized something quietly powerful. He had taken from me for a long time, my comfort, my safety, my sense of control. But in the end, I took something back that mattered far more. My power. People think revenge ends with the moment of impact. The instant where the balance finally tips and the person who caused all the damage feels even a fraction of the pain they inflicted. But that's a lie we tell ourselves because it's comforting. The truth is, revenge doesn't end loudly. It ends quietly, in the spaces afterward, in the moments when you're alone with your thoughts and no longer have adrenaline to keep you company. That's where the real reckoning happens. And that's where I found myself weeks later, standing in my backyard, staring at the exact spot where everything had once felt unsafe. The air felt different now, lighter, not because what happened was erased, but because it was finished, final. There was no more waiting, no more wondering when he'd cross the line again. The threat that had lived in the back of my mind like a low hum was finally gone. And for the first time since moving into that house, I understood what peace actually felt like. It wasn't joy. It wasn't excitement. It was absence. The absence of fear, the absence of dread, the absence of feeling small in my own space. I replayed everything in my head, not obsessively anymore, but thoughtfully. I thought about how easy it would have been to keep ignoring it, to keep telling myself it wasn't a big deal, that it was just gas, just inconvenience, just something I should let go of. That's how it always starts, small violations, tiny thefts, little moments where someone tests how much they can take from you before you push back. And every time you don't, they learn something dangerous. They learn that you're safe to exploit. I used to think strength looked loud, confrontational, explosive. I thought standing up for yourself meant yelling, threatening, making a scene. But that night taught me something different. Strength can be quiet, calculated, patient. Strength can look like letting someone underestimate you while you take notes. And when I finally understood that, everything changed. I stopped feeling guilty for not handling it the nice way. Nice had gotten me nothing but stolen peace. What stayed with me the most wasn't what happened to him, but what happened to me afterward. I noticed how my posture changed when I walked outside, how my shoulders didn't curl inward anymore, how I stopped apologizing for taking up space. Those weren't conscious choices. They just happened, like my body finally understood that. It didn't need to brace itself anymore. Trauma teaches you to shrink. Justice teaches you to expand. Every so often, someone in the neighborhood would bring it up again, lowering their voice, glancing around like the story itself might hear them. They'd say things like, "I always knew something was off about him," or "I'm glad someone finally did something." I never corrected them. I never confirmed anything either. I just nodded and let them talk. There's power in letting people fill in the blanks themselves. Silence, I learned, can be louder than confession. At night, when I lay in bed, I asked myself the hard questions. Would I do it again? Did I regret it? Did it change who I was in a way I couldn't undo? And every time, the answer came back the same. I didn't regret standing up for myself. I regretted how long it took me to believe I deserved to. If there was any sadness left in me, it was reserved for the woman I used to be. The one who thought endurance was the same thing as strength. Revenge stories often glamorize the payoff, but they don't talk enough about the aftermath, about the way you have to integrate what you've done into who you are. I didn't become cruel. I didn't become heartless. If anything, I became more aware, more selective about where I gave my energy, more protective of my boundaries. Stopped explaining myself to people who didn't need explanations. I stopped prioritizing comfort for those who never cared about mine. And karma didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like balance being restored, like the universe quietly adjusting the scales without asking for permission. He didn't lose because I hated him. He lost because his actions finally met consequences. And that distinction matters. This wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. This was about accountability, showing up late, but showing up nonetheless. Sometimes, when I'm out in the yard now, I catch myself smiling at nothing in particular. Not because I'm thinking about what happened, but because I'm not thinking about it at all. That's how I know it no longer owns me. Trauma lingers when it controls your thoughts. Healing begins when it fades into memory instead of dominating the present. If there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's that justice doesn't always come wrapped in legality or approval. Sometimes it comes wrapped in resolve, in refusing to be an easy target anymore, in choosing yourself even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. The world doesn't reward quiet suffering the way we're taught it does. It rewards boundaries. It rewards consequences. I don't tell this story because I'm proud of revenge. I tell it because I'm proud of survival. Because there are people listening right now who are being underestimated, disrespected, slowly drained by someone who thinks they'll never push back. And I want you to know something important. You're not weak for waiting, but you're allowed to stop waiting whenever you decide. You're allowed to reclaim what's yours. So if this story stirred something in you, if it made your chest tighten or your jaw clench because it felt familiar, don't ignore that feeling. Listen to it. Let it remind you that your peace matters, your boundaries matter, and sometimes the most satisfying justice isn't about watching someone fall. It's about finally standing tall where you once felt small. And if you've ever witnessed karma arrive right on time, or maybe a little late but still right on target, share it. You're not alone. And neither was I.